Alright, so let's look. Alright, so let's talk about a couple things real quick. Okay? Let's go back to something very basic, something you learned probably seventh, eighth grade. Okay? Now, alright, guys, this is a basic algebra skill. Okay? Very simple equation, one step equation. What do I have to do to 3? I got to get x by itself. What do I have to do to 3 to get? You got to subtract, right? So that's x equals -3. So guys, what I did that for is because if something's being added, to get rid of it or to undo it, you have to subtract it, right? What would you do here? Divide it, right? What about, yep, because this is being divided, right? So you times 2. Those always cancel out, be x equals 24, okay? What about, what would you do with the 10? Add it. You're doing the inverse, opposite, right? And then 2x equals 40, and then what will we do here? Divide. Now, what I'm doing is all of these are inverse operations. Okay? Now, the reason I'm showing you this, because a lot of you guys know these inverse operations from classes past, but now, Math 2 is when you start getting introduced to other inverse operations. Now, say you have, how do I get x by itself? You square root it. If something's being squared, okay, if something's being squared, you always take the square root, okay? And what that does is, guys, that cancels out. This is also an inverse operation. We'll talk about other ones probably next week. But this is also an inverse operation, okay? So that being said, guys, we're going to use a lot of these inverse operations today, especially the one with the square root. So just keep that in mind. All right. Now, let's look at this. You don't want to do that one first. Well, we can do number one because these can get a little harder. All right. So what you have, you got the square root of m over 10 equals the square root of 3m minus 87. Okay. Now, guys, let me go ahead and tell you this. When you have a square root over something like this, like 3m minus 87, m over 10, you cannot do any kind of operations with these expressions until you get the square root to go away. Until you get the square root to go away, those are pretty much off limits. All right. Now, if the square root is the inverse of the square being squared, what is the inverse of the square root? Okay, now think about it. How do I get rid of this? How do I get rid of the square? Square root, right? How do you think I'm going to get rid of a square root? You square it, right? Those are inverse operations, right? Now, same thing here. How am I going to get rid of these square roots? Square it. Now, what you're going to do, you're going to square both sides. Because, guys, remember, in algebra, you can't do it to one side and not do it to the other. Okay? All right? That gives us m divided by 10 equals 3m minus 87. All right, so we squared it. We got square roots away. Now we can work with the insides. Okay? Okay, so now we need to get M. First of all, we need to get our M's on both sides. Then we need to get, on one side, and then we need to get it by itself. Okay? Now, I'm looking at this fraction. I don't like this. So I want to clear this. How do I clear this fraction on this side? By 10, right? So you're going to times by 10, and you're going to times by 10. Okay? Now, don't forget, if you've got this, guys, if you multiply by 10, you have to just put parentheses around it and distribute. Okay? So what happens, this cancels out as M equals 30M minus 870. Okay? Okay, now, I need to get my M's on one side, and I need to get this constant by itself. So to do that, I'm going to subtract 30M. All right? Notice, guys, we started with inverse operations. A lot of inverse operations here. You're probably going to use about every one up to this point. All right? Now, that gives me negative 29M equals negative 870. And then, last but not least, we're going to divide. All right, so now, we're going to take our calculator. They ain't no telling what that calculator's going to like when I get it up here. Huh? 30? All right, so M equals 30. Now, to check that, guys, going back with your original equation, now we found that M is equal to 30. Okay, so we found that after we did all that solving, that M is 30. Now, everywhere you see an M, you're going to plug in 30. All right, so 30 divided by 10 equals the square root of 3 times 30 minus 87. Now, what's 30 divided by 10? 3. Now, 3 times 30 is 90, okay? Minus 87 is 3, so it's the square root of 3. Does this prove that it's right? It does, because both sides equal. So you know that's right. So your answer here will be 30. All right? Now, guys, we've been doing a lot of quadratic work lately, so let me um, let me show you one that's going to be a quadratic equation. Let's look at number 3. I don't want to do it on that paper because it might run out of room. Okay, so number 3, P equals the square root of negative 72 plus 17P. Now, guys, can I really do anything yet until I get rid of this square root, I mean? So how do I get rid of it? You square it, right? So, all right, now, that gives me P squared equals okay. Now, what kind of equation has this turned into? it turned into if your highest exponent's a 2, that is now what they call a quadratic. And I know that simply because the power of 2. Okay? I know that because a quadratic equation, anytime you've got the highest power you have is a 2, then you've got a quadratic equation. Okay? Now, guys, if I've got a quadratic equation, what does one side have to equal to? 0, right? Now, guys, I want to keep this positive, so I'm going to move this stuff over. Okay, so I'm going to add 72. I'm going to subtract 17p. Okay, now what that looks like is this: p squared minus 17p plus 72, and it's now equal to 0. Because guys, that cancels out and that cancels out. Now, guys, this thing will factor really easy, but a lot of you guys use the quadratic formula, so let's use it. Okay. Now this is a quadratic. I'm trying to solve for my independent variable, which is p. So it's going to be this: p equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2 times a. That's your quadratic formula. Okay. Now, my a is 1, my b is negative 17, my c is 72. Okay. Okay, so that gives me p equals 17 plus or minus now. So if I put my discriminant in my calculator, man, gives me 1. That was really simple. All right, so that's p equals 17 plus or minus the square root of 1 over 2. Now, what's the square root of 1? 1, right? So that's going to be 17 plus or minus 1 divided by 2. Okay? So that gives me 18 divided by 2. Let me do that. 18 divided by 2. 17 plus 1 is 18. Also gives me a 16 divided by 2. So now, that one's equal to 9. That one's equal to 8. All right. So now, no, positive. Because see, 17 minus 1 is 16. 16 divided by 2 is 8. Okay. So now, guys, this is a lot of work, but I got to show you something when it comes to these square roots. I mean, quadratic ones like this. All right. If you go back to your original equation, p equals the square root of negative 72 plus 17p. You need to plug these in and see if it works. Okay, so now that's going to be, I'm going to try this one first. That's 9 equals negative 72 plus 17 times 9. Now, that's going to give me, let's see what we got here. So negative 72 plus this 81. What about square root of 81, guys? Is that a perfect square? It is. So it's 9 equals 9. That checks out, okay? So that's a good solution. So 9 is good, okay? Now, plug into 8. 8 equals the square root of negative 72 plus 17p. Should be 8, sorry. Plug in 8 there. All right, now, second enter, I'm going to bring it back up. Go here and put 8 here. That's 64. What's square root of 64? 8. So, guys, that means you have both of those are good solutions. You have no what they call extraneous solutions. Okay. So those are both your answers. You may see them written like this. Math's a lot of notation, guys. So that would be probably on a test like the EOC or NCFE. You'd probably see it written like that. Okay. All right, guys. Why don't you try number 9 on your own? Y'all do number 9 and then we'll do it together. I want you to try it first. That's 3, yes. Square both sides. All right, now that's going to be 36 equals 4a. Then if you divide by 4, a is 9. All right. And if you think about it, guys, that would work because 4 times 9 is 36. If a is 9, 4 times 9 is 36. The square root of 36 is 6 plus 9 would be 15. So you know that would be the right answer. All right, guys, I'm going to let you work on these a little bit. And then maybe in about 25 minutes, I'm going to show you how to do it on the calculator. Okay? Because I know you guys are tired of me talking because I'm tired of talking